Okay, good. We've got lots of people coming in.
Okay.
All right, so let's get
Yay.
going. So thank you everyone for joining what is the first in a series of 4 webinars on supporting teens with ADHD. And tonight, for our first webinar, we have Joy Badler, our Chief Encouragement Officer, speaking to us about executive functions, which are those brain-based skills that help our kids do all those good things like planning and organizing and regulating their emotions and managing time and following through. And when parents come to the conversation, they're very often frustrated and they're confused and they feel like my child knows what to do. Why aren't they doing it? And executive functions are really the thing that explains the gap between knowing and doing. And so that's what we're starting with tonight. And so with that, I will turn it over to Joy and just if you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will have time for Q&A at the end. Over to you, Joy.
Thank you so much, Blair. So, thank you everyone for coming tonight to our virtual summit. And it is my hope that you walk away with the mindset of I can't yet for your kid and be able to help them to understand what this concept is. I tonight am going to be looking at the works of Dr. Thomas Brown. Some of you may be familiar with him. Blair mentioned to me today that unfortunately he recently passed away. Dr. Brown created a model of executive functions that is impeccable, and I have been following his research for at least the past 20 years. So I am going to share this with you now. And oh, wait, has it shared? Yes. Hang on. I have to stop the share and start the share because this is the Joy Badler way. Okay, so there we go. And oh, I managed all by myself. So executive functions are the the brain's CEO. They are what help us to be able to, as Blair said, to plan something, to begin it, to stick with it, and to hopefully complete it. And they they live primarily in our, oh, let me change that, in our prefrontal cortex. But the executive functions mature extremely slowly, very often into our even early 30s. So this is the reason why our children and teenagers often benefit from scaffolding. Now, Dr. Brown, who I mentioned earlier, groups the executive functions into 6 clusters that work together. And I love this analogy of it being like an orchestra, and when everything's in sync, we're on our way. But if the conductor is overwhelmed, there's going to be an issue with the performance. And this is why we need to look at the different 6 clusters that Dr. Brown formulated. And the first one is activation. Activating, starting something big and overwhelming tasks. And that means you need to organize. You need to plan. You need to estimate the time that the task is going to take. You need to prioritize and you need to initiate. And those of us with ADHD very often have a very difficult time prioritizing initiating and avoiding procrastination. As an adult who lives with ADHD, and I believe Blair may or may not attest to this, I I need very often to pull myself towards myself, to remain on task and get things going. So the struggle for that for our kids with ADHD, and for those of you who are sitting here this evening breathing deeply because your child may not have yet started to study this evening, that's ADHD. That is the struggle. Leaving things to the very last minute until the deadline is right there ahead of you, and then the person is ready to go. Now, also, you'll find the avoidance of bigger projects. So that could be their CCTs. We see with a lot of our ADD kids that there has been a lot of trouble over the last couple of weeks getting CCTs done. But when it's crunch time and they need to really lock in, get it done. And I'll talk a little about the impact of that after. But I think what for me in my home, and I've seen over many years, has been very, very helpful is the Sunday sit down. And all that involves is mapping out the week with your kid, their tests, their assignments, their activities, their programs, anything that is important, put it on the visual calendar. And this allows them to plan for if they've got a practice or if maybe they're working a shift. They can look at their week and plan accordingly. And then you look at the assignments that they have coming up, and you help them break it down into manageable components. Not this whole huge project, but little chunks that are easier to manage. And gradually, what is a lot of hard work for you right now, and just when you reach the teenage years and you thought that you could be more independent, sorry, you need to be still supporting your kids with this. When you help your kids to schedule and you teach them how to plan for deadlines, they are actually one day going to be able to do this themselves. I have parented university-age students who have been able to do this without my help and successfully. So the one last thing that I think is very important in terms of the overwhelm and starting big tasks is offering a body double. So whether it's a sibling or a parent, it's someone who is working in close proximity with your kid, and you're there for 10, 15 minutes. You're not on top of your child. You may be in the kitchen and you're preparing dinner and they're at the workstation. You just kind of, there's someone who's there who's also working at the same time as them. The next cluster is focus. And it's very, very interesting because when we think of ADHD, immediately we think of focus as being what ADHD is all about. And yet, when you look at the work of Dr. Brown, you see that this is one of the clusters of different executive functions, because some of our kids, especially those who don't present as hyperactive, do find it easier to focus in different areas, particularly the areas of interest. Anyway, let's go back to the focus of being focused in the digital world. I've been doing this gig for many years, and I remember when computers first became the thing in the early 2000s, and we had Technology Tuesday, and it was the one day a week kids were allowed to use their computers. And oh my gosh, do I long for those days again when just one day a week kids use screens, because our children have been brought up with this perpetual distraction, and people with ADHD are unable to sustain attention on a non-preferred task. And homework, more often than not, is not something they prefer to be doing, rather than being on their phones or using social media or gaming. Gaming is a huge pulling attention from homework. And then there you are having to deal with your kid who needs to switch from this being their preferred activity, gaming. It's lovely, lots of excitement, they're really entertained, to the non-preferred activity, something like this, like a boring lecture. And what what I have found to be extremely, extremely helpful is creating what I call a focus zone. And basically, what a focus zone is a place where your kid can place their technology, their phone, primarily. Um, Also, I mean, we have the added problem that they have everything available on their computers as well, but we can look at how you can overcome that. But just basically having a place where your kid takes their phone and puts it upside down in the focus zone, and their phone is on silent, and it's been set for a 25 to 30-minute study period. So you collaborate with your kids on where you can do this and how you can do this to create study blocks. And you empower them to use their phone to work with them, not taking things away from them. I'm taking your phone away from you. You're actually punishing yourself more than you are them in any event. But you aren't teaching them how to use their phones. So we need to encourage our kids to use Do Not Disturb. I notice a lot of our students do have Do Not Disturb so their phones don't ring during class. So Do Not Disturb, we've got covered, but we can look at also them choosing to implement web blockers or self-management tools, like even as an opportunity to, be productive for themselves. Like, if I do this, then I get to do that. So it's important that we normalize multitasking is not something that works well for somebody who is wired with ADHD. So we need to plan our task and plan to do it one task at a time. And if we can get that activation going without the phones and things like that and that kind of distraction, it's a huge, huge asset. Oh, wait, I forgot to change the slide for that. I'm very I'm very tech savvy, as you can see. Okay, the next one that we're going to be looking at is effort. Your kid being able to just sustain energy through the week, for a lot of them, they deserve a major high five. ADHD impacts the individual's ability to maintain consistent effort. And especially with tasks that are not inherently pleasant, it is very, very easy for our kids to fall into the crash and burn syndrome. And unfortunately, there's some of them who are going to be in this right now because they left everything to the last minute in exams. But the crash and burn cycle, they work intensely right up until the deadline. And after that, they are exhausted. And it's relatively easy to sustain for our little 4-day exam period, but this definitely is not a healthy way to be productive. So you need to encourage them to maintain sleep hygiene. And this is extremely challenging. I have 3 of my own adult children and me, all with ADHD in our house. Working late at night, pulling the all-nighters, it's not the best brain time. The best brain time is after a break when we're rested. It's not at 11 p.m. at night. And honestly, in my house, we had a 10 p.m. cutoff, and that was when tech went out. Cell phones don't sleep in rooms, and my kids are trained to do that. It was just what we did. I've worked with a lot of kids who you've almost needed to surgically remove their cell phone from their hand. We can get our kids to do this. And Blair and I are looking at doing a whole bunch of other parent seminars down the line. And one of them is definitely going to be on the importance of sleep hygiene because, especially for executive function, no sleep, no good. Um, Also, so often when we talk to our kids, our ADHD kids, they're going to get it done tonight because they're going to work for 4 hours solid. Well, firstly, it's not possible for a person who doesn't have ADHD. Somebody with ADHD is certainly not going to be doing schoolwork for 4 hours without a break. What does work best is breaking longer work sessions into shorter increments. And a little later in this presentation, I'm going to give you some examples of some techniques that Blair and I work with, introduce to the kids. Okay, the next one is emotion. I think that it's very much a teen situation. Think back to when you yourself were a teen, being a teen and growing into your prefrontal cortex is a time of great emotional dysregulation. And especially with our kids who are wired with ADHD, they have major challenges regulating their emotions and they experience mood swings, and they can sometimes be really, really, really mean. Mean. As the parents or the adults, we need to be mindful that they have these big feelings. everything is big. Now, coming up with like their grades before exams, social situations, unsocial situations, any issues. But the biggest issue of all, in my opinion, is feedback. They are highly, highly, highly sensitive to what sort of feedback they receive. So, dealing with perfectionism, outstanding, outstanding, outstanding students, so capable, perfectionist, and this leads to complete avoidance. And this also has to do with, when kids start crashing out and overcompensating. But for our kids who say, if I can't do it perfectly, I won't start, and then they don't start, that is when we as the adults need to validate their stress. We need to allow them to know that it makes sense that this feels like such a lot. You know, sometimes different things work for different folks. For me as a parent, my children found it very validating when I would share my own struggles that led to success. And, often as the parents, looks like everything, oh my gosh, everything was just so hunky-dory for us. Giving your kids these opportunities to know that these are challenges, but they're not insurmountable. We can develop executive function. It's like a brain, like we can develop brain muscle. So when your child is in a state of high emotion, model and teach coping mechanisms that shows them how they can behave. Get up and take your kid outside, go on a walk. You don't need to be talking to them. You're just physically moving. You're getting them moving. You're changing their whole system. Encourage your child to use breathing tools. And Blair and I teach many different breathing methods. Breathing is the tool that you always carry with you until you take your last breath. Um, Short breaks. Short breaks are great, and that we'll talk about in the Pomodoro. And another thing that I believe, if you just can't and you have to and they need to use their phone, there are unbelievable coloring apps that are so mindful and so calming. And they're also stimulating and interacting, but it's not doom scrolling. And you can set your timer for how long you're going to do it, do a little bit of that mindful, just have a little break away. That's a great option too, if you can't get your kid off your phone. Now, the last thing that we need to be very mindful of with emotion right now, kids are writing exams. Our kids are stressed. We are stressed. Even their teachers are stressed. This is a stressful, stressful time, and we have to be very, very mindful of ensuring that we maintain a non-judgmental tone. So your kid comes out of the exam, they're really, really stressed. Hang on, take a breath. What do you think you did well on in the exam? What did you do? What were you able to do well? What didn't work? Okay, let's take it down a few steps. What do you think you could have done differently? Get them thinking, encourage them, let them know that they're safe and that you're teaching them how to handle stress. The next, the cluster, is memory. And your kiddo, your teen, is juggling so much. They are juggling at least 4 different classes. Some of them are even taking classes out of school. And with that comes a lot of remembering. There's assignments, there's their appointments, there's social interactions, and one of the most challenging things for our kiddos with ADHD is remembering. Now, it breaks my heart because so many of these kids are really, really, really working, doing their very, very best to get it done, and then they forget to submit it. And, as the kids get older, so this is something that they are going to need to do at our school. Their teachers would probably remind them to submit it, but often I'll be working with kids who are in public school and they'll say, "Oh, I did it. I forgot to turn it in." Also, when they've got 4 different subjects going on, they lose track of the expectations across the different subjects or even activities. And this can be very challenging. So, what I recommend and what has been very helpful for me as a parent is to encourage a single system. Have one planner, be it a digital planner, a planner app, an old world agenda, oh my gosh, but keep all courses, all appointments, everything, all in this one place. And then you institute the daily 5 minutes. Before you leave the house, you take 5 minutes to look through that planner. So for us with our kids at TPS, it would be Edsby. You will take 5 minutes, maybe even less, and peruse everything that is coming up for that day. And once you've done that, that is when you have a launch pad in your house at the door, somewhere close to where you are going to be leaving. And at that launch pad, that is where your kid's backpack is, their charger or their extra charger or their extra charger should be there. You have got a station, a launch pad where everything is ready to go. So in the morning, after you've done your daily 5 minute check, you go to your launch pad and you are ready to head off with a good start to your morning with most everything intact. That would also be a good place if you're making kids lunches. Put their lunches in the launch pad. Let the kids get there and then be ready to go. And now we have our final of the cluster, which is action. And this self-monitoring, time management, and follow through can be very, very, very difficult. People with ADHD have impulse control, and self-inhibition is very often a challenge for them. And time management is really something that needs to be focused on. So your kid very often will underestimate the amount of time a task may take. And it's very interesting because sometimes, like I'll say to my littles, how long do you think this is going to take? And they'll say, 5 minutes. And there's no way on earth this is a 5 minute job. But very often they'll say, oh, this is going to take me 50 minutes, but it only takes 15 minutes. So what we find is they either underestimate or overestimate, and then, especially when they underestimated how long it would take, then you get the crash, the rushing to prioritize, to get everything you have to get through. This is when they really, really, really mean like you have to keep out of their way. This could be a danger zone. So they're rushing to get everything done. They don't check any of what the instructions are. They don't look through the rubric. They miss small and sometimes important facts, important instruction. And at the end of the day, it sucks. So what I suggest you do is ask your kid, how long do you think this is going to take you to do? Okay, I'm going to time you. And that way they can guess how long the task is going to be. And then you can compare with them in terms of their internal time awareness, how long something takes. Also, you can give your kids, and our students would have this before before you submit checklist for all of their work, like did you follow all the instructions? Did you look at the rubric? Is your name on your work? Is the attachment attached? Just basic checklist things that are easy for them to work through and not tenuous. And perhaps the most important one is never saying to your kid, you need to study. That is sending them straight into a spiral. What we as parents need to do is we need to schedule with them when you do your Sunday sit down, and then you need to say to your kid, not tonight when the exam is tomorrow, but a few days ago, so moving forward, you need to say to them, what is your plan for studying for your exam on Thursday? Let's look at this. Let's put this into our calendar. Let's see what you're going to do and when you're going to be doing it. Okay, so now we'll just take a quick overview, and obviously, well, not obviously, I will be sharing a handout after, and there will be examples and these kinds of slides if you would like to look at them. But we can see that if you stop and look at your kid, you are going to see that there are some areas where your kid is really great and other areas where they need additional support and hand holding. And that's okay because we know that they are developing, and we also know that individuals with ADHD are very, very often highly sensitive people, and they find it very, very hard to deal with what they perceive to be failure. So we need to look at what we can do to facilitate success, and also to ensure that when they don't meet with that, it's not a catastrophe. So, as I promised, I'm going to now give you a few strategies and you can be done with hearing me blah, blah, blah. First one is, this is my favorite tool to combat procrastination. I'm sure that there are some of you who are watching this tonight who know even for yourself that you have work to do and you are a grown-up professional, and still sometimes you simply cannot pull yourself toward doing it. This is something that I've really struggled with for a long time. And so when I've got big tasks ahead, I do body doubling. I have people who are supporting me and ensuring that I'm staying on track and B squared. But we we need to have strategies in place. And the Pomodoro is a magnificent strategy. It's basically what it is setting aside 25 minutes. Those 25 minutes, you are going to go, 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 go. You're going to keep on pulling yourself back towards your project. I encourage my kids, and I myself put a sticky note on my computer saying, with what the question is, like, no, I remain on task. You are on task for 25 minutes. Like, say, for example, you want to clean out your house. You could say to yourself, 25 minutes in the kitchen, tidy, tidy, tidy. When that bell rings, you stop. I always say to the kids, finish your sentence and then stop, because by the time they get back to it, they've forgotten what the sentence was. So after 25 minutes, you stop and you allow yourself a 5-minute break. Now, in the perfect world, that 5-minute break would involve going outside and shooting hoops, walking around the garden, smelling the flowers and listening to the birds, reading a book. For our kids, it's quickly going to check up on Instagram to see how many likes they got or who snapped them. We're all a work in progress. We can look at how we're going to get past that for the 5-minute break. But you are allowed 5 minutes to do that. When the buzzer rings, your phone goes back into the focus zone. And you repeat another Pomodoro and another. And after you've done 3 Pomodoros, and you are feeling strong and great, because look what I just accomplished. I did it. I didn't say I was going to and then at 10 o'clock start. I started at 10 o'clock in the morning and I did this and I feel awesome. After you've done 3 of them, give yourself a great break, 30 minutes, and see if this is something that is going to work for your kids. One size doesn't fit all, and there are some kids who are really, really, really looking for how best to be supported, and ultimately we will find ways, and Pomodoro may not work for them. But I would say that in all my years of using Pomodoro, the majority of adults and children who employ it find that it is an extremely successful technique. Okay, now I'm going to just have a pause now before we do our takeaways and check with Blair if there are any questions. Okay, well, I certainly hope that it wasn't because I was talking too fast and nobody could understand what I was saying. Okay, so
I'll jump in with a question if that's okay, Joy.
I would love that.
I love all the strategies you're sharing, and particularly the ways that we can help set our kids up at home. And I think you touched on it briefly at the beginning, but I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit on the idea that we can develop executive functions, that these aren't static abilities, that they can change. And maybe you can share a little bit from your experience as an educator or personal, whatever feels comfortable for you, just some of the changes that you have seen.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I believe that I'm living proof that one can develop executive function. One is able to use tools and develop their own individual toolbox where you find what works for you. In my private practice, I don't have a program. I meet my kids where they are because each of us sees things in different ways and uses different techniques that work for us. And I am extremely visual. The people whom I'm most successful with work well with my strategies as well. But I think that over the years, I learned how to adhere to a schedule. And that for me turned my life around. In 2020, I started a, a kind of a scheduling boot camp on it was, just during COVID and everyone was on their last nerve. And we figured out how we could actually use our time constructively. And so I started doing these schedules for success. And like we do, Blair, with our kidlets, is we advise our kids when we are walking into a class. We start the lesson by telling them, today we will be doing. They know what's coming ahead. And I realized that in order to overcome a lot of the anxiety associated with having ADHD, having the security of knowing what you're doing when is extremely comforting. So, putting physical strategies into place was then able to help me a lot with take action, which is something, as I think anybody here watching could see. That's my cluster. Yeah, I have learned how to adapt. And then, as you know, I am very, very, very involved in daily mindfulness and meditation, which I believe is extremely important for grounding and to remind ourselves that sometimes things do look like they're a catastrophe. But in the same way as we can worry about how badly that's going to turn out, we can also imagine joyful outcomes. And I think that essentially, I feel as an adult, I feel pretty successful. And it took me a long time to feel successful as somebody who's wired differently. But absolutely, if you invest in yourself and your little people and be a mama bear or a papa bear or just be a human being, we can definitely help our kids develop. This is a skill and tools that can be learned. So if I look back at me in high school, in my final exams, I was the chick who was pulling all-nighters at the university library. I was there to study and to meet the boys. But that was it. I just did those. And that worked until it didn't work anymore. And here was somebody who was highly capable, and I crashed. I crashed out. I failed big time for the first time. And I was mortified. And all my friends were going ahead. And here was me, the failure. And that taught me how to avoid procrastination. If I was asked what my biggest bugbear is, that I procrastinate. So, okay, does that answer your question?
Does. Thank you. And it's so nice to hear about some of the things that you've implemented that you've had personal success with. We have two questions from parents. One is, are there any good planning apps that you would recommend?
Absolutely. And what Blair's actually making notes. Blair and I are going to have a B squared huddle tomorrow. And I have a bunch of apps that I use with some of my private clients. I am going to put out I don't know, Jason will see whatever it is that we put out with, I've got a bunch of apps and other online resources that I recommend. So yes, thank you for that. That's great.
And I can add to that, assignment calculators can be really helpful. There are a lot of those available online. I think the University of Waterloo has one. If you Google assignment calendar calculator, that will help you or your child break down large assignments or plan backwards to study for tests. We have one more question here, and the sort of summary of it is, how can you tell the difference between quote unquote bad behavior and symptoms of ADHD? How do we know how to label that? How do we tell the difference? And how should we as parents approach it?
I love that question. I love that question. And as you can see here, my initial key takeaway, my husband asked me how I have the audacity to say this. Your child isn't necessarily lazy because sometimes your kid is. Sometimes they just need that opportunity to go into, I call it the armadillo, just withdraw and find their little dojo zen space where they can just be left alone. They are so dysregulated that anything that you say to them only makes it worse. And the post-trauma recovery when things have been said is excruciating. So, how do you identify bad behavior and is it motivation related? I think that and Blair would probably talk better to this because this is more her lane that I'm kind of jumping on. My lane is very much my background is education. I think that sometimes good kids, oh my gosh, it's telling me to add effects using hand gestures. I won't, I'll put my arms down. Sometimes a good kid may become bad and doing things that for us as parents are disappointing or maybe even shameful or embarrassing. Um, you know when your kid is just being a you know what. I think that when we are dealing with the ADHD dysregulation, what I do is I do a lot of breathing. And like my kids know when I start like go quiet and breathe, it's like, oh my God, she's about to explode or we're getting a lecture. But I try to calm myself down and just remember how it felt to be that child. There is no child, no matter what a little maniac they may be, there is no child who wants this. They're not asking for this. This is them trying to learn how to use their operating system, which they are going to learn. We're just in the process. They are very often, they are doing the best that they can. And when they're recognized and valued and feel that acknowledgement, they aspire to behave that way in order to get that kind of reward. And I'll give you a perfect example. I love going into the classroom. It's my favorite place to be. Unfortunately, last year a teacher was ill, and I said, I'm going to go back into the classroom. It was for quite a few weeks. And it was a wonderful experience for me because it reminds us who these kids are. The first few days, these kids really, really tried me. They thought, okay, here's this old chick, and we're going to take her to the cleaners. Well, it didn't take long for them to realize that that wasn't going to happen. But the point is, your kids are going to do what they're allowed to get away with doing. And we have to help our children manage, navigate ADHD in order to ensure that their struggle is supported. We've learned, I have my own experience. I've done infinite research. Punishment and reminding kids does not work. It doesn't strengthen the executive function. Just makes them feel worse about themselves, the punishment. And the reminders that then they come home and you reminded them, but it wasn't in a way that actually, so it just makes them feel worse about themselves. So we need to figure out a way that we can all be better together. Blair and I are available for ongoing support if you would like to create independent profiles with your kids and looking at things that you can do in your home. I would gladly offer more support. But I want to leave you with saying that I hope that you acknowledge yourself for being here tonight and committing to yourself and your family and being better. Because when we know better, we can be better. I also want you to know that things are going to get better. This is sometimes a lonely, tenuous journey that you feel that you are navigating alone. You are not alone. There are many forefathers and you have a lot of support. One size does not fit all. Every child's profile is different. Don't compare with your friends and your cousins' children. Children have different profiles. They develop at their own rate. Meet your child where he or she is, not where you want them to be. Because who knows? You may have hoped for the concert pianist and your kid is not that, right? We need to We need to meet them for who they are. We need to believe in them. And we need to remind them that we all own the power of yet. We simply have not achieved this yet. That's it.
Thank you, everyone. I know there were a few unanswered questions. We will take note of them, and Joy and I will either follow up with you individually, or we'll include the information in a handout, or we can address it next week. We will do our best to get to everyone. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you next week. I'll be presenting next week on maintaining a healthy relationship with your child with ADHD. See you then.
Thanks, Blair.